from Frontier Precision. So just want to go here, do a little informal talk about, drones and whatnot, and, answering any questions you have. I currently work for Frontier Precision. Before all this, I worked for a lot of consulting engineering firms. I've been dealing with drones in a commercial sense for probably 7 years now. So I started back before Part 107 came about, and it was all Section 333. I got a lot more serious into it right when it switched over between Section 333 and Part 107, which in a way kind of stunk for me in the manner that with Section 333, you needed a private pilot's license. And a lot of companies were willing to pay for you to get one. And then right when I started a company who was starting to get into the process of me starting to get my private pilot's license, 107 came around. They're like, oh, you can just get your 107 now. So I missed out on a private pilot's license, which is unfortunate, but I guess it works.
And Jeremiah, before we go any further, what you meant is a lot of the 107, a lot of the kind of the numeric terminology is fairly new to all of us, and so it's part of our dialogue here, our open and fun chat. Is would you be able to highlight a little bit on that, and maybe even before we get going, welcome to folks who are joining us from home here this evening, and joining us here tonight is Jeremiah Wong, and he has been with Frontier Precision now for I think you said 6 years.
I've been a Frontier Precision for about 9 months,
But
but I've been in the drone.
Before.
Yeah, I've been in industry for about 7 years now. So back when you started with, I guess, drones and you want to do commercial work, there wasn't really any kind of regulation that went around. Once it started becoming popular, the FAA started coming up with ways to regulate it and just make it more official instead of having random people come in and flying drones and doing stuff like that. So initially they came up with something that was called Section 333. And with that regulation, it pretty much meant that if you wanted to fly commercially, you had to apply for a Section 333 exemption. And pretty much what that meant is your company as an entity would have to apply for and qualify and get the certification. And in the certification, because there was no real rules because everything was so new, they kind of pulled from the aviation side of things, a lot of things from the aviation side. So in terms of, what qualifications you need, one of the main ones was needing a private pilot's license. And that was one thing that a lot of people couldn't get, because in order to get a private pilot's license, I think it's around 40 hours of flight time. And in the end, it's like $12,000 just to get that private pilot's license. Not only do you need to get that, you needed to apply for it and get your company exempt. And then not only did you have to get exempt, you had to write in specific details. Whereas if you wanted to operate around certain airports, you had to put that into your exemption. So you would be included into that. I know a guy that I used to work with, he applied for an exemption to get exempt and be able to fly in all the airspaces in Wisconsin. And it was really cool and really neat, but it was kind of unfair in that he was one of the only people to realize you could do that. So then he had the ability to fly anywhere he wanted in Wisconsin, but no one else could unless they specifically applied for that certificate of authorization to fly in a specific place. So then it went from being something that was, I guess, an entity, a company to apply for a 333, to changing the rules a bit to make it easier for people to get into. And that's when they introduced Part 107 certification. So with the Part 107 certification, it no longer needed to be registered as a corporate entity, as a company. It was put on the individual. So when it was put on the individual, you had to study for a Part 107 test, which is pretty much when I took it, and I still, for the most part, what it is now is there is some aviation stuff in there. There's sectional readings, there's aviation weather. A lot of the aviation weather stuff really made no sense in that I remember some of the questions I answered were like, at what temperature and altitude would you experience icing? And on a drone, if you're flying in icing conditions, I mean, you shouldn't be flying in icing conditions with the drone kind of thing. So it's still kind of in between, but more or less is the Part 107 made it so more individuals could get into commercial UAS operations. Um, so when I started, like I think 6 or 7 years ago, was that borderline in between them starting the Section 333 and them starting the Part 107. Um, so when I transitioned from working at one company where, to be honest, I worked in a very gray area. I didn't have a private pilot's license, but I was still flying for them and doing their jobs and everything. Um, and it was so gray that it didn't matter to them. And I was just happy because I got to fly drones as a job. So I wasn't going to say anything. Um, so once Part 107 came around, it was right at my transition from one company to another company. And the new company I was going to, they already paid for 3 people to get their private pilot's license and everything. So when I came in, I was like, I'm going to go study. I'm going to get my pilot's license. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to achieve like one of the small dreams that I had growing up. And then Part 107 came. They're like, all right, study for this test and take it. Then you can be our pilot. And I never got my private pilot's license, which kind of stinks, but that's just the way it is, I guess. But it made it a lot easier for me. It was a lot less studying. It was a lot cheaper in the end, and it made it so I was able to, I guess, get a dream job of some sorts. I never thought I'd say, drones is my job. I've had, drones in my job title or anything like that. I mean, growing up, I thought I wanted to be, a photographer and get an art degree and something like that. But no, I ended up getting into the engineering field. Um, for a period in my life, I was I was a manufacturing engineer. I was a conveyor and service piping designer. And then I just kind of fell into drones in that when I worked for a company, they found I was initially hired to do 3D modeling and design, and they found out I did drones, and they were like, "Hey, we want to start a program. Do you want to start the program with us?" And I became the drone pilot. So initially, I started doing, all the rules and regulations are, standards of operation books and stuff like that, where I just, to be honest, I copied a lot of things that I saw because there was just nothing out there. Um, so coming from, absolutely nothing to where we are now, it's been pretty amazing to see how things have changed. Um, but in another aspect too, I will personally and completely admit, I think it's too easy to get your Part 107. I think it should be actually a little bit harder because pretty much everyone, when I took the test and when I took my reoccurrent test recently, I studied for about 2 weeks and I took the test. And I think I scored on my first test I ever took was, I think I got a 98 on it after 2 weeks of studying. And that's something for me where it's just like, it seems a bit too easy now. And then a couple weeks ago, I took the reoccurrent. So after 2 years of having a Part 107, you have to re-up your certification, and it's good for another 2 years. Um, Before a couple weeks ago, to take the reoccurrent, you would have to sign up for the test with the FAA or PSI, I think. It's a company that does all the FAA testing. Go to a airport or a place that does the PSI testing, and you take the test there, and it is, I think, $160 to take the test. And then you would have to do this every 2 years. Um, Luckily for most companies, you end up, expensing that, which was completely fine. But lately, they made it even easier to where you don't have to go in and take a test. You watch a video and a couple slides and online, and then you take like a really short, I think, 40 question test. When I took it, I literally skipped everything in it and went straight to the test, and I passed it. But for the most part, the things on a test are things that are pretty logical. I mean, don't fly over 400 feet. Don't try not to fly over people or non-participants, stuff like that.
Yeah, and
Um,
those are all, really,
yeah,
I know one of the topics we want to talk about is that 107 and some of the training opportunities. I can kind of ask you a little bit more about
yeah,
that. 'Cause I think a lot of us in class here and people that are aspiring to look in, to these different types of career
yeah,
opportunities, Jeremiah, are interested, what can they do, and like maybe what training opportunities there are in this. And, and even it, as you were sharing your story, your journey, it seems like that same journey or a similar journey was being shared by, pretty much a lot of other companies too, because there
yeah,
wasn't, I remember it was just sort of poof, here it is. And okay, what do we do and what's being regulated? I know that I've had conversations with, realtors and
yeah,
photographers, and now seeing drones like in social media and people doing their own filming and
yeah,
all those types of things. So that whole landscape of it was just sort of like a bass fishing tournament where everybody just goes running. There's
yeah.
not a lot of just water churning everywhere. And now it seems like there's a little bit more control, and we've seen some of that go on. One question that as we're talking about, how did we get here? That's kind of from the initial drone movement early on, was a little simple devices that could, basically thrown up into the air and they take some basic pictures and come back down type of thing, or RC,
Yeah.
whatever. And how did, in your experience as well, how the progression of things, here sort of did that, so was that sort of on par with what was going on globally? Like when we look to see what's happening globally with other companies and how
Yeah.
their arrangements, or what I guess experiences or observations did you have looking at the kind of the legacy of global changes in that?
I'd see when it comes to drones globally, I mean, the biggest thing is regulations and how to regulate it. That was a huge change that I saw, from being, everyone who flew a drone was a hobbyist to now there's a classification to be a hobbyist and a commercial professional kind of thing. Um, Seeing things evolve from, everyone back then when you started out in terms of drone wise is you had to build your own drone. There was no other option. Like right now, there are a few um, different companies out there that make drones, and there are only a few that are, I would say, in a way, good enough to be reliable enough to be used in a commercial sense. The biggest one that came out, or the biggest game changer, was DJI when they came out with their automation and flight control software and applications. And what's really neat about DJI was my family actually had a little background with them in that uh, my uncle was unemployed for a while and he was really big into model helicopters and stuff like that. And he went to a trade show. So he went to just a standard old hobby show and he met this guy at just one of the random booths and started talking to him. They were both, like I'm Chinese, he's Chinese and stuff. So, they walked around and he started talking to this guy. And this guy he talked to ended up being Frank Wong, which is the CEO of DJI. They ended up talking, and from, I guess, then on, he offered him a job, and my uncle ended up moving to China to help this guy start DJI. So he helped them a little bit with, the engineering and the design of these aircraft. So I got to see, when the original Phantom, the Phantom 1 came out, I saw it in prototype form. When the original Flame Wheel came out, it was laser cut wood that, had, the most basic kind of flight controllers and motors on it, stuff that, when I look at now, I'm like, I don't understand how we flew these things. Like, I don't understand how not only do we fly these things, but we allow them to fly themselves, which was a scary kind of thing to see, to now where, back then getting a drone to hover was a fantastic thing to do. And then when it happened, you're like, this is amazing. It can fly by itself. And then now it's just, you can take up so the newest one from DJI is the M300. You can take that thing up in 20-mile-an-hour winds and it just holds stable. Like you look at the camera and the camera doesn't move. You put in a camera, or yeah, the camera view doesn't move. And then not only that, they put a 30 times zoom on it. So then I'm sitting, 2 football fields away from a car, and I'm zooming in and I can track this car and read their license plate from 2 football fields away while 400 feet up in the air, which is insane from when we came from, like little drones like these. Oh, that's not going to work. Here, let me turn that off.
Yeah, some of the background noise, I know what you mean on that there. And this is, when you're talking about this, Jeremiah, too, like the kind of those early onsets were little basic models. And I know we've had a number of alums that have built their own drones too. And, and part of that history has gone from like the stability platform to now, like you were saying, or the ability to function basically all, well, maybe not all types of wind conditions or elements or whatnot, but the progression of the technology has gotten a lot better, really. And, with that being said, when we look at the overall, some general applications and things like that you've seen from maybe some of the earlier drones to kind of where we're at now, like in other words, what are people doing with drones back then to what are we doing now, and how is that, when we're talking about time, I mean, we're talking about 5 years, 10 years, in that time span, in class, we talked about how technology rapidly evolved. So, given some of the early drones, what were they used for, from what your experiences were compared to what can we do with them now that we couldn't, 5 years ago, 10 years ago?
I mean, back then, a lot of them mostly were used for photography platforms. Putting up the lightest, not the best, cameras up in the air and taking like really terrible photos like the earliest cell phones used to do. Like when we first got our cell phones, we snapped a photo and you barely see it, but it was amazing. And initially then that was the biggest thing when, you could build your own drone, you could put it 10 feet up in the air and, you could snap a photo of everyone at once. And that's one aspect that happened. The second part of that was the whole fact that you went from, cobbling together parts and motors and stuff together and getting something in the air to getting something in the air that was stable enough to fly for like a minute. And then going to now where not only are you carrying a camera, but you're carrying a gimbaled high definition camera. And then you go from carrying a high definition camera that is stable on a gimbal. And then now you've progressed to the point where you can not only hover it, but you can have it fly missions, waypoints. You couldn't even fly missions yet. You could fly certain waypoint from one point to another point to another point, and being able to capture that imagery. And then it moved from, sticking on a nicer camera and flying to waypoints to where it is now, where we're actually programming, 50-acre flights in one flight, doing a strict pattern and taking photos with it to generate, aerial maps. And then you go from that aspect of it to now you introduce that automation, you introduce that nicer camera to where now we introduce, RTK, real-time kinematic GPS and post-kinematic processing, to where now it's no longer not just a random video in a random space or a random photo that you have no idea where it is, to where now you're getting photos to within, 6 feet of an actual location. Like you can tag it to 6 feet and using that to generate a map. And then now you introduce, PPK processing and all these new things. And now not only is it a high definition photo and it's an orthometric photo, it now becomes accurate down to the inch. So right now we have the capability to not only, fly a drone in the air on a gimbal that's a high definition camera that can fly for 40 minutes up in the air. We can get it so we can take photographs and generate an aerial photo that is accurate in the real world down to an inch.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool. And when you were referencing the gimbal on some of the new drones, just some folks may not know exactly what the gimbal is, but basically it's the camera essentially. Is that correct there, Jeremiah? Like the bottom, when the drone's in the air, it has the ability to turn and move, and I guess fix upon an object, whether you're taking an aerial flight that is with a flight plan, so to speak, which is another thing there we'll be talking about, but you want to show
so
that?
then before you just had a camera that you kind of just duct tape to the bottom of your drone and hope for the best, and, trigger camera every couple seconds, to now you have this camera to where this camera that's mounted on this gimbal that can rotate like this, that will compensate for how the drone's moving. So this camera will always remain flat and stable. And the ability of being able to do this, coupled with the drone, changed everything in terms of being able to frame a particular shot. Technically, the gimbals have existed for the longest time, especially in manned aircraft. But now technology to make it small enough to fit on a drone that I can hold into my hand, that can fly for 30 minutes up in the air, and that can hold, a camera looking straight down to get nadir photos. So photos that are 90 degrees perpendicular to the ground, in order to generate those aerial maps.
So really a lot of the evolution that I personally have seen, which has kind of precipitated some of the questions there, and if anybody else up to this point has any questions for Jeremiah, just feel free to jump in. It's a great opportunity just to ask questions. Has really been, I've seen some of the older first gen drones, like the basic ones, and I know we're going to talk about the different types of them coming up here tonight as well. But I do remember seeing some of the old, just with the static, it's almost like an airplane, with the one camera facing down. And you're right. I mean, the ability for image stabilization with the gimbal on the bottom of some of these newer drones is pretty cool. I mean, to have just, whether it's oblique imagery, 3D imagery, 3D modeling compared just to the top down, is pretty cool. But anyone have any general questions about anything that Jeremiah's been sharing thus far?
Yeah, Jeremiah, really appreciate you sharing your knowledge here. I'm curious, we kind of talked about where we've started, where we are, and where are we going, do you think? I mean, what do you see coming down the pipeline? What are you excited about?
I am excited for lidar. Lidar has become amazingly cheap. Well, not amazingly cheap, but relatively cheap, to say. I'd say 5 years ago, you could get, so I guess if you guys don't know too much about lidar, so how lidar is how it's always been, was you have these terrestrial based lidar systems, and these systems shoot out points, a laser point out, hundreds of thousands, even millions of times a second, to when it hits something and bounces back, you get a specific point in space, and it knows that point in space. And then if you shoot enough points out, you can create a three-dimensional model of what's out there. So you could run a terrestrial scanner inside like a room, and you'll get a 3D scan of the room, and each dot corresponds to a physical space inside this room. And for the longest time, the only way you could do it was lugging around, a 50-pound lidar machine that's huge, and having to put that, on a tripod, leveling it up and stuff like that, to having them shrink smaller. And now it's to the point where, I guess about 5 years ago, these systems were, I guess, about $500,000 just for the lidar sensor itself, to where it is now. You can buy DJI's new lidar system is, I think last time I looked it up was about $17,000 to what it is now, compared to 6 figures of what it was back then. And as long it's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. But then the other aspect to think about it is, um, so the terrestrial scanners are, sub-inch accuracy. And now with LiDAR, we're at inch accuracy. The DJI LiDAR unit, it's kind of funny because it's brand new and everything, but there are LiDAR systems that exist for drones that we can carry that are still under the six figures, but those are inch accurate. But then when you look at the DJI LiDAR system, and it's nothing against DJI, but the accuracies they promise are 5 to 10 centimeters horizontal and vertical, which when you compare that to, like a yellow scan unit, which is, inch accurate, the DJI unit is kind of like, it's really cool, but can we actually use it? Because now it's not accurate enough. So it's really cool and everything, but we're coming to the point where it's a LiDAR unit that is small enough to fly in the air, but it's still not good enough. So I thought that was crazy.
And that, Barrett, thank you for your question in response to and I appreciate that. It was one of the things in this class that we spend a lot of time with is dissecting data error.
Yeah.
And the question is just because we use a piece of gear to generate data doesn't mean that it's good data.
Yeah.
And so I know this is one of the things we had listed on our agenda here tonight to talk about different types of add-ons and sensors. We'll maybe talk more about that too. But that type of a threshold is really important when somebody's out flying these drones for different applications, whether it's back yesteryear static photos. I mean, we see, I think for perhaps many of us in the class here and beyond, we're seeing this technology being applied in like BIM modeling as of late, thermal scanning, different things like that, law enforcement, and there's a whole other ethics and legal side of that we'll talk about that I have some questions on here for you. But understanding purpose ultimately is one thing that we're trying to really drive home in here, and I appreciate you sharing that about what is the purpose, how does the technology, which may include the sensors, dovetail into a reliable, valid product ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the sensors and lidar sensors and stuff too, is I mean, I definitely see lidar as the future, as in that it is a lot more accurate, and you get better data out of it and more accurate data. But then again, it's all in how you're using it and what you're trying to pull from the data. A lot of the times I talk to a lot of people and they want to buy a lidar system, and then I ask them what kind of data they're trying to pull out of it and what kind of areas are they flying, and they say, yeah, we're mostly flying over dirt. And to me, I ask them, is then why do you need lidar? Because photogrammetry is already inch accurate in most cases, and there's no reason to get lidar because you can still get that accuracy of photogrammetry. And when it comes to lidar, is the only reason at this point to spend the money on lidar is if you need to shoot through foliage, kind of thing. So when it comes down to, I guess, the differences in technology, photogrammetry still has its place, but lidar is still the future because lidar can still get even better. Where I guess in my perspective, I don't think there's too much more in terms of accuracy that you can pull out of photogrammetry. But it will still always have its place because having that photo and being able to pull out line work is something that you can't do in, I guess, an intensity mapped lidar point cloud kind of thing. So it really depends on what the use is in terms of the data. So they have both places for sure.
Jerry, go ahead.
So Jeremiah, based on your experience in the industry, as far as seeing where we've come from and looking around where we're at right now, as far as both platforms and sensors, what do you see the future holding for all of this?
I would see a lot of things moving. In terms of future, I just see LiDAR units becoming a lot smaller, and pretty much everything being able to fly both an RGB camera and a lidar unit and still get that inch accuracy from the data, even better than inch accuracy too. In terms of platforms, I would like to see, or I'm hoping to see platforms that are as easy to use as like a DJI unit without all the restrictions. DJI has a ton of restrictions, and I guess by no means it's a personal thing for me. I wouldn't say it's DJI's complete fault that they have all these geozones and geolocks and stuff like that, and issues with, where can I fly kind of thing. But when it comes to the future, I guess it's not only the sensors, but easier to use drones. Because right now you have DJI, which is incredibly easy to use, and the only other reliable platforms are either crazy expensive proprietary ones like stuff from SenseFly or stuff from Parrot. The only other ones out there are ones that fly PX4 based things, so PX4 and APM based flight controllers. And it's really funny to me because before DJI even came out, PX4 and APM were the main flight controllers. You couldn't get anything else other than those because those were the best. And those went by the wayside because DJI came out. And then now all the drones that are coming out in terms of rules and regulations, because the big thing going on right now is no Chinese drones. None of these foreign drones coming in there because they're afraid they're going to steal the data. Everyone's going back to these really old PX4 platforms or APM based platforms. So the issue with those platforms is that they're not easy to use. They're easy to use to an extent, but there's a huge learning curve with them. And there are a lot of buttons you can press to screw things up. So for me, I would say it would be making things a lot easier for, I guess, more so the general population to use and more accurate sensors.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Jared, was that helpful? Were you there? Jeremiah, when you work in this industry every single day, and there are some people like myself and others who are kind of on the periphery, we don't have access to all the cool tools and gadgets every single day and whatnot. What do you think right now from a more that technology perspective and what you guys all do inside of your organization? What do you think is the biggest user of drone applications for data? Like, is it construction, precision ag, law enforcement, or what are some of those big industries that tend to?
I would say the biggest industry right now that I see in terms of commercial wise would be aerial mapping and surveying. That is the ones that I see that are spending the most money on these units and are putting a lot more effort into it in terms of being able to utilize the data that you get out of it. After that, I definitely see precision agriculture. Precision agriculture is definitely getting up there. And then one more that I never thought would be a thing, which is a huge thing, is mosquito control. Mosquito control has come up a lot lately, probably in the past year, where a lot of companies are going through and flying areas and doing, precision mosquito control, going over specific areas to eliminate mosquitoes in specific places to make sure, for the health of the population and everything. So I would definitely say, aerial mapping, then after aerial mapping would be agriculture. Agriculture goes to mosquito control. And then now what's always been there, I guess it's been something more solid that kind of has always been staying consistent is, search and rescue, law enforcement, surveillance type of things.
Sure.
I wouldn't say it's drastically improved. I just think it's always been there because, these would be the perfect platforms to do it.
Sure. I can see that.
Yeah.
When you were referring to, some of the aerial surveys and whatnot, are you talking about they're doing, topographic lidar surveys, or are they doing like kind of BIM stuff, like just aerial, progress checks, or all the all the above?
All the above, actually, because right now, I guess the last company I worked at, actually, the past 2 companies I worked at, it was one of those things where we got the drone and I was able to prove that we can get, that inch accuracy. It became one of those things where if we made the bid for the job and we got the job, the first thing that would happen is I would go fly it. I would be one of the first people on the ground to get the status of that place brand new, and get a 1-to-1 point cloud so I can produce a up-to-date surface and an up-to-date photo. And I would go back every month or so to get that information again. And it's just one of those things that went from, I'd fly this drone because in some ways it was kind of a novelty to get that photo, to being one of those things where we do this first now because we want to see the progress and we want to be able to say, this changed, or we built something and it doesn't fit now. Why doesn't it fit? You guys changed something, kind of deal. And then you would have that progression over time to either, do that construction monitoring process and to help prevent, back charges and things like that.
Yeah, so it's kind of a really a cool documentation piece. And when you're saying a 1-to-1, for accuracy, that's pretty good. So you're able to track really fine, I guess I'd call it level, detail inside of all those, whether it's construction projects or really, quite frankly, anything that you wanted to document spatially from.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, this isn't entirely to do with drones, but this is when, before I started in drones, this is when I got into terrestrial lidar scanning. And this is when I worked in conveyor and service piping. And it was also, it's the same reason where we would go out and we get a bid for a job and we got the job, we would fly. So conveyor and service piping was for coal-fired power plants. And then we would route all the piping through to make sure everything fits and goes where it needs to do. And we do this all in 3D, all in AutoCAD and stuff like that. But what we end up doing is we would go there first, scan the entire area, and then we would design off of it. And every so often we would rescan the area and design off of it. And what we ended up doing and ended up saving a ton of money was we would be designing a pipeline and we draw a pipeline through a specific area, and then we'd find this beam that be in our way. And the beam's not supposed to be there, but the beam is there. And there's no way saying that it's not there because in the scan, it shows it's 1-to-1. We did this last week.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where like, hey guys, guess what? You guys screwed something up. This isn't our fault. You guys got to fix this and you can't charge us for it.
Right.
So it's the same thing with drones too. And the ability to do something like that is astronomical in terms of making sure jobs get done quickly and properly without back charges.
And I could see that being super valuable. And, whether it's elevation, whether it's detail, or that accuracy, that's what is so mind-boggling. We've talked about that in this class is, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we were excited to have, 30-meter resolution imagery, or even elevation, and how that is radically being changed by use of these drones is pretty incredible. Question I had just kind of in listening to you about some of the applications that we're talking about here. A lot of counties, in my some of my prior experience, I worked in county governments and on some committees and boards and things like that. A lot of counties or states, they fly their, they call them state lidar or county lidar flights or whatever. And last fall, this is kind of segueing into our one of our next topics here on different types of drones and things like that there, Jeremiah, but there were huge, rather big drones that were flying different agricultural valleys and or egg fields, egg areas.
Yeah.
I think they actually flew the entire county looking, they're doing like depth to bedrock sensing. I think just for the state, maybe USGS or something, just controlled drones, big drones flying over depth to bedrock assessment studies. And to my question though about like the lidar, are drones right now fully capable of going up cheaper and more effectively to conduct, let's say, state or county LiDAR flights, for updated data?
I'd say we're getting to it. I wouldn't say we're completely there yet. We're pretty close. So one of the drones that we have is the Tron. So the Tron is by Quantum Systems, and it is a vertical takeoff fixed wing that carries a LiDAR sensor in it, a yellow scan Surveyor Ultra. And it's capable of being able to collect data at forward flight speed and nets, depending how fast you fly, over 600 points per square meter, which is a lot, I guess, to say, in comparison to manned flight where you're looking at, like 10 points per square meter kind of thing. And we're coming to the point where, it's no longer not necessarily the drone, it is we're not at the point where a LiDAR system is light enough yet to be able to be carried on something that isn't huge,
Sure.
I guess to say.
Right.
The Tron system that we have, it has a 6-foot wingspan. It's absolutely huge. And it can fly for about an hour, but I wouldn't say it's to the point where, we're able to fly hundreds of miles, or not hundreds of miles, thousands and thousands and thousands of acres yet, kind of thing.
Sure.
But we are slowly getting to it. And I guess the biggest hindrance is we need smaller, better LiDAR sensors, and we need better batteries. Batteries, I think, are our biggest issue right now, is having that flight time and that efficiency in flight. Because we're running into the issue where multi-rotors are pretty good, but fixed wings will still be king when it comes to projects over 500 acres.
Sure. And
yeah.
when we were talking about, this might be a good opportunity, and I know we did a little bit earlier there in talking about the different types of drones that are out there. And, I know they're kind of like the little play recreational ones without a camera, you just send up, you fly them.
Yeah.
And so maybe not so much those, but in terms of, recreation versus actual commercial types.
Yeah.
What are some of the, more common things that people are using? I know like these huge fixed wings versus, kind of little ones that can go up, do some quick checks like in construction or whatever it might be, and then come back down. What are some of the things those types that you tend to work with a little bit more?
So the types I work with, so when it comes down to it, there really isn't too much of a difference between, I guess, what is currently in the hobby world and what we actually use commercially, except for, when we use stuff commercially now, a lot of things are a lot more tested and they're a lot more proprietary softwares. But when it comes down to what's on the inside of all these drones, like this guy. So this guy right here, I mean, every single drone is going to have the motors. They're going to have electronic speed controllers to control the motors. They're going to have a flight controller. Every single drone out there that you see has the same basic parts in it. How they work is all basically the same. I mean, they all have to spin a clockwise, counterclockwise way to make sure it moves and everything. So the basic principle of all of them are all the same. When you get to the point where the biggest difference between, let's say, a hobbyist drone and a, more of a commercial drone is the engineering that goes on the inside in terms of getting everything to fit, and most of all, the software that you use with it. So in terms of the difference between the two, it would be how you interface with the drone as opposed to the difference in the drone physically. So like even in fixed wings, like I have this fixed wing right here. I mean, planes work in every single way, like even a scaled up real version model to like this one right here. They all have elevators, they all have ailerons, they all fly on the basic same principles, and they all have the same basic parts. But like the flight controllers and everything on the inside, it's just how they work and how they're programmed it's what's different and what makes it easier. Um, so I can say, I could build a drone that can do aerial mapping for probably under $5,000 when something I sell is going to be over 30 grand. But the difference between the two is that if anything goes wrong with the commercial one, you have people there that help you out. You have the support network behind it. And in the end that's what you end up paying for. And that's what you want in the end is you no longer have that liability on your end of things, but you have a company to lean on to make sure you're always up in the air and you always have something that can use to collect the data without having to worry about it. And that's one of the principles for me where I am fully capable of building these drones and I've been asked to build them for mapping purposes, but I always say no because I don't want that liability on me. I don't want to be the person to have to answer all the questions and fix every issue that comes up because I need to go out and collect that data. I need to process the data. I need to extract the data. The drone itself and flying it isn't something that I want to worry about. I mean, I'm more than happy worrying about as a hobby as when I go fly out recreationally. But when it comes to doing work with them, that's the part that I don't want to have to deal with in a way, because I will probably get obsessed and want to play with them more than I want to get them to work.
Right. Yeah. That's the scientist in us all there. And,
Yeah.
That's very akin to, what we use for different mapping software, like we use ESRI and things like that. We pay a hefty fee, but it's for that support. And I think that's a great point. And so to that end, early before we started our session here this evening, we were talking about different types of drones, like recreational versus commercial. I'm curious, I think many of us might be too. What are some companies, if we just start off with maybe looking at more of the recreational side of things, or Jeremiah, like what are some companies now? Like early on, DJI was like kind of the front runner and everything. Now we're starting to, it's different players are catching up a little bit here. And I'm curious if we could separate our discussion here just for this question on like commercial and recreational. What are some really reliable companies that you see upcoming that, have that support in background for, let's say, someone interested more in the recreational side, which might be, filming, doing their own documentary, filming, things like that, or just for fun. What are some, I guess, reputable companies growing up in that area now?
I would say one of the big ones is definitely Altel. Altel's coming out with really good things that are coming out. Altel, Parrot has always been pretty good lately, that are pretty good and up and coming. Hopefully they keep at it. I mean, recreationally, I guess that's a hard subject to say because there's still two sides of the recreational side too. I mean, you have the DJI recreational side of things with the Mavics and the Phantoms and stuff like that, but then you have stuff like this, which is the recreational side for me. This is from a company called Newbie Drone, and for me, it's just this is what recreational is to me. Like buying stuff and putting something together like this is recreational to me. Whereas for some people, recreational is like a Mavic kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's a definition, basically. It's context.
It's definitely context. And for me, when it comes to like these companies like that, it's not necessarily just a single company. Because when it comes to my side, when I think of recreational, is all these parts and components in here are from different companies. And then I assemble it all together. And that, to be honest, I have more fun putting these things together than I have flying it.
Does that have a camera on it, by the way?
Whereas, yeah, there's a little camera on it. This is an FPV drone.
What's
I'll
a
send you
flight?
guys links to some videos that I've flown, but yeah.
What's a flight time on something
So
like that, on that little one?
this is about, I'd say 3 minutes, 30 seconds. It's enough to get you in trouble.
Right, right.
I mean, you can get it flying pretty quickly, like scale pretty quickly, but this is also one of those ones where you can fly at full force into someone's face and it doesn't hurt them.
Sure.
I've had some videos come out or that I've posted where, I flying around people. I fly around, my office out in Maple Grove. I flew one at my wedding. My wife wasn't too happy about it, but I still did it because I wanted to. It was a great video. But yeah, something like this. Yeah, I put the goggles on. I have my controller and everything, and like I have a blast flying these guys. I probably have more fun flying this guy than I do flying this racing drone right here.
So when you say
Only
goggles,
because
when you say goggles, are you saying for protection reasons, or are you saying like it's a
No.
kind of like a in camera view of what it is that
I have an in-camera view. So I wear these goggles and I have a live view that comes out this camera right here. So it's essentially I'm inside the drone piloting the vehicle around. So that's FPV flying. So for me, that's fun flying for me because I can zoom around trees, I can zoom around people. With this one, I zoom around, I have, a 900 square foot apartment and I can have a blast flying, 20 packs a day around my apartment, flying underneath chairs, under the table, chasing the cat around, stuff like that. I have a blast flying stuff like this.
So that's an interesting point too, that from a recreational standpoint of actually, kind of in a entertainment venue of actually people setting up like drone courses where you race from that point of view of the drone through obstacles and things like that, which I've seen a lot of.
Yeah, and that's they use these are the drones that they actually use for that. So like these things are scary fast. Like this thing probably breaks 100 miles an hour. I designed and built this frame myself. I actually designed everything in Inventor, and then I had the parts cut out of carbon fiber. I sent them out to get them cut, and then I have, I put on motors and I put on a flight controller and everything. And yeah, this thing, whips around over 100 miles an hour. When you rip around like that, you can fly it through trees, you race it through gates and everything. And it's pretty darn durable too. So you can slam into a tree and most of the time it won't break.
Right. And that's, this is interesting now, like with one of the topics I know we kind of danced around or talked about a little bit there, but I'd like to get into a little bit more of these things too, with the racing drones and things like that, or the small little wreck ones.
Yeah.
When we come down to licensure, regulations, now what would you need to, let's say, fly a racing drone like that, or your little small one? We're not talking 107 here or anything like that. Or what are basically what governs appropriate use of something like a recreational drone like we're talking about here with some of those companies?
When it comes to flying recreationally or flying as a hobby, there really aren't that many regulations when it comes to it. There are basic rules as in, don't fly over people, don't fly over 400 feet, those basic rules like that. But when it comes to needing a certification or license, there is none. And in a lot of ways, I mean, you have to register your drones. If your drone is more than 250 grams, you have to spend $5 to register it with the FAA. And then you have to place your tail number or the serial number that they give you on the drone. So in the case anything happens, they can recover it and they can track you back with that number. If it's under 250 grams, like something like this, it does not need to be registered. So you can fly this wherever you want, unregistered, because it's underneath that weight limit. And that's the biggest, I guess, rule and regulation when it comes to flying recreationally.
It's just is that stuff typically included in the packaging? Like if you were to receive a drone from some of those recreational companies and whatnot, is that clear? So like if you were to purchase that, are those requirements or regulations provided in there?
No, not really. Some of them might, but in general, yeah, there's nothing official when you buy them. Like when you buy this guy right here, it more or less is, it tells you if you, I have another one where it has a video transmitter that can go up to, I think, 100 milliwatts. When, if you go anything over, I think, was it like 25 milliwatts of power, you need to get a ham radio license. They have things like that where, they'll lock it to only 25, but you can unlock it yourself as long as you have a ham radio license or certificate. And they say that for sure, but in general, yeah, they don't really say anything, because in the end, to be honest, a lot of the people, who fly things like these, they don't really follow the rules necessarily. But then a lot of the times when they do fly it, they're not really doing anything much besides flying around trees in a park kind of thing. So it really depends on the use case and who exactly is flying it and what their purpose of flying it for. Because I know a lot of people who race these and that's all they do with them. They have fun flying and racing them. But then I also have seen and know people who do things that are highly illegal and they fully know they're doing it, like, going downtown and diving next to a high-rise building kind of thing like that, which is stuff where, you're not allowed to do, but because it's not entirely regulated and there's really no one out there to enforce the rule, they just go and do it kind of thing. So in a way, it's kind of like the Wild West when it comes to more the recreational side of things. But the majority of people follow the rules and don't do stupid things with them. And that's the point where we are right now when it comes to these, is that we have to self-govern in a way, because even though there are rules, there are people who won't follow them. And that's how we have geo zones and geolocks with DJI, is because people were flying those and landing them on aircraft carriers, or flying them in the middle of downtown, or, buzzing people on a beach and stuff like that. Those were big enough to where it would cause an issue. And then DJI just said, screw it, we're going to regulate it so people aren't going to complain to us anymore. Whereas things like these, where you build them yourself, you kind of can't do that. So yeah, it's good and it's bad.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I guess, for me personally, that it comes down to, and I've yet to see anything. I'm kind of waiting for this stuff to trickle down. But you're right about the enforcement. But I'm sort of envisioning in the not too distant future, maybe there are some now, where individual cities or counties or townships or whatever have their own ordinances developed over use applications of drones.
Yeah.
So, they're kind of like, maybe federal, and then maybe there's smaller units of saying, oh, somebody said no drones, period. Nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but it's kind of still moving into that, through that territory. And I think you're right. It's understanding the technical stewardship of governing. Like if people play well,
Yeah.
and are responsible, there shouldn't be issues. But it's always, that handful that creates the issue, and then that sort of ruins it for everybody, type of thing on that. And before I get going down this rabbit hole, just because it's pretty cool, I didn't want to forget about the other companies that were kind of those big reputable ones that somebody might look at for support on the kind of the commercial side. And I know you mentioned DJI, but what were some of the other big ones there? And then we can come back to this one. This is
like Altel's there, Parrot's there, SenseFly. What other companies? Newbie Drone is a good company. What are the other ones? There are other ones like, I guess it's kind of hard because there aren't too many out to say.
We're talking commercial side now. Right?
We're talking Commercial side. So when it comes to commercial side of things, I mean, you do have DJI, but then other than DJI, it's back to Altel. Altel is probably the biggest competition to DJI right now. Altel, SenseFly is still there because they make the EB, they make the Albris, which are two good drones. Quantum Systems, that's another one. They make the Tron and the Trinity. Both are vertical takeoff and landing aerial map or fixed wings. Wingtra is another big company in the commercial side of things. We picked up a company called Inspired Flight. They are a pretty much DoD approved, all American, well, almost all American supplied parts and everything. Well, as American as you can get. The frame's probably still Chinese, but the motors are made in America, hopefully, I think, all the way. But there are a lot of little ones that are out there. Was it Alti Unmanned is another good one. They used to go by the name Steady Drone. There are a lot of smaller ones that are coming out that are getting better, but it just ends up coming to, when it comes down to commercial drones, is DJI versus Pixhawk or PX4 based flight controllers. Because right now, when it comes to operating these things, there are not many companies out there that make flight controllers or flight planning applications and stuff like that.
That goes back to
that's the hardest part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that goes back to the ease of use type of function. What about, I just saw this maybe a couple of weeks ago about they've been touting this as a very AI oriented type of autonomous type of Skydio. Yeah. What do you know about that as a more of a startup type?
It is more of a startup. Their drone is really, really good at collision avoidance. That is what they started on, and that is their biggest thing that they do is collision avoidance, accident avoidance, stuff like that. So it's really, really good with that. I don't know too much about them, only because they are a dealer direct only kind of place. Like, we've tried to get more information on them. We've wanted to sell for them and everything like that. But they always want to keep things internal to them. So I've never been able to actually fly them, but from what I've seen is they probably have the best unit in terms of anti-collision. So more close quarters kind of flying thing, like through trees and stuff like that. Their accident avoidance systems are probably the best. But they still, I guess, I'm more biased in that I'm really big in aerial mapping and surveying, and they're not really big into aerial mapping and surveying. I think they're trying to get into it more, but the main point about their drones is, law enforcement, search and rescue kind of stuff like that.
Sure.
So they're definitely getting better. I just hope that they will extend their reach or extend their product line a little bit more, other than a single drone kind of thing, because they only have one, and the one that they have looks pretty amazing and works really, really well for what it does. But in terms of, I guess, commercial and practical use, it's very, very specialized in that it's really good at, working around trees and objects and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of been a little bit of my sense as well. I've not flown one or anything, just kind of researched them, just saw it again as of late there. But I just wanted to pause and ask if folks have any questions. I wanted to jump in for Jeremiah. This is really cool, Jeremiah. Thank you. Yeah. Questions or comments that anybody might have? Go ahead and shout it out if anybody has anything. Michael, go ahead.
Great. This is great information. Your racing drone that goes 100 miles per hour, what happens? How do you keep it in range, or what kind of range do you have when it's zooming away from you? How do you manage that as a pilot?
Practice. I guess in terms of range, you kind of you really don't fly more than probably 500 feet away from you normally. There are other ones that I have that are bigger ones that, are more long range drones that can fly, out miles if I really wanted to take them. But for the most part is, you just have to know your surroundings kind of thing. In all technicality and legal aspects, you have a visual observer with you all the time when you fly them, which definitely happens all the time. But for the most part, it's just you just have to be wary of your surroundings. When signal starts getting low, you definitely know when your signal gets low because your goggles, your screen, what you're seeing starts getting very staticky. And then right when it starts getting staticky, that's when you just turn around and book it back, or you're going to just lose it. Because most of these drones, like all these hobby drones that I have, except for maybe one or two of them, they don't have any GPS or anything in them. There are no anti-collision sensors. There's nothing to, like, if I let go of the sticks, that thing's just can continue going. It doesn't hold stable. It doesn't fly around, or it'll just continue flying and it doesn't stop kind of thing. So it's one of those things where you have to know the drone and you have to be able to control it well and get enough practice with it. And that's how you end up, not out flying it, I guess to say. Because yeah, when you do outfly the drone, that's when a lot of people just, kind of run. I don't know how else to explain that. But for the most part is, yeah, it's up to the person on what they're doing and, how, I guess, good they're going to be with it.
That's a good point. And yeah, I'm going to kind of pull us back into where we were before we jump back into the commercial side, but on some of the legalities and how a lot of the various types of drones are regulated. I can see on the commercial side, there's quite a bit more regulation on that side, on the more the recreational fun racing slash, kind of hobbyist thing. Not quite so much, although sounds like the discretion of people to be proactive and making sure they're trying to do the right thing because it might not be explicitly super clear. Curious, Jeremiah, have you seen or been a part, or maybe not a part, but know of any regulations that have kind of stemmed down, beyond federal levels, like into state or cities, banning or regulating drone usage of any and all types? If so, what might some of those things be?
So a lot of things that I'm seeing lately are counties or, parks departments and stuff like that, like just banning drones from the parks completely. They don't want people flying them because they just want to avoid the hassle of having to enforce it and telling people to leave, because that always ends up in some kind of confrontation. You see a lot of the times where, where I used to live in Illinois, or where is it in Illinois? I lived in Illinois in Lake County. They banned drones in all Lake County parks. If they caught you flying a drone in Lake County parks, they try and shoo you away, and then they call the cops on you, kind of thing. And it doesn't matter if you're flying, a racing drone or like a Phantom that you're just flying up in the air and, getting a cool 360 photo. It's where, it's come to the point where, you have to be sure when you go to a place to make sure that they don't disallow the use or prohibit the use of flying drones there. And I'm definitely seeing that a lot more, and it is definitely something where you have to be a lot more careful about, because it definitely exists. And I mean, for the most part, you can always find places that don't disallow it. It's just, again, it's one of those places that happens to be, if it's a park or something, it's all up to the people there and how good they are. And if they can keep it so the drones aren't banned in a particular area, I guess to say.
I saw a few people pop up there just on our active Windows screen there if they had a question or not on for our class there. Feel free to shout it out. If anybody has a question there. Jerry?
So I have a question more. This kind of backs up a little bit, but in regards to those of us who are interested in the platforms, the background you have, it sounds like it's pretty heavily in RC modeling. Don't really see a whole lot of hobby shops nowadays with like building stuff. You know, hobby towns about disappeared. Radio Shack is off the map. For people who are interested in trying to get more hands-on experience with the platforms outside of just buying one and flying it, what would you recommend?
One of the big ones would be Newbie Drone is a big company. Race Day Quads, they're a big company into it. Ready Made RC has actually been around for a while. They're really good with rules and regulations. Race Day Quads, the owner of it, Tyler Brennan, is actually the guy who sued the FAA for the rules and regulations that they're imposing on it. So he's a big proponent for the recreational side of things. And I think Race Day Quads is the biggest in terms of recreational hobby items when it comes to drones. Same thing with, was it Get FPV? Get FPV is kind of the Walmart of the hobbyist drone area. So, I mean, they're a good company, but they're big enough to where we try and push people away from them to like something like, you know, another one would be like Pyro RC, Pyro Drones, Tiny's LEDs is another smaller company. All these companies, they sell all the parts, they sell ready to fly kits, they sell everything you need in order to get up and fly. And to be honest, I am really huge because I started as a hobbyist and I started building them. One of the biggest things that has always helped me, because I have that side of me, it always helped me on the commercial end of things because it made it so I understood how they worked. I understood every part and component. If, you know, something happened and it crashed, or if something isn't working, I can troubleshoot and figure out why it's broken. And I can either fix it myself and I don't have to wait 2 to 3 weeks for sending it out for repair. I can figure out what's wrong with it and I can fix it myself and get it up in the air as soon as possible, kind of thing. The more, for me, is the more you know about it, the better off you are. And the less you have to rely on someone or someone else to get it done for you. So like if you were, especially like with things like these and a hobbyist side of things, is they're not autonomous, they're not automated. So like not even the part where you build them and you know the components yourself, is you have to actually learn how to fly them. You're not relying on GPS, you're not relying on any of the anti-collision stuff, you're pretty much relying on your hand-eye coordination and knowing, you know, how to control it and what to do in case something happens. I would say, you know, at least 75% of people on the commercial side of things have no idea how to actually fly one of these things. So if they lose GPS connection, they're probably never going to get it back. Whereas, you know, the other 25% of people, you know, they lose GPS connection, they still have the ability to, you know, slow things down, figure out which way is forward, turn it around and get it back to you, instead of being like, oh no, I'm screwed. Hopefully it comes down and not kill someone, kind of thing. So for me, it's just, I am big in telling people that, you know, they should learn how to build something small like this, even where, you know, everything's ready to made. They have all connectors. You just plug things in. You don't really have to learn how to solder or anything like that. And, you know, learn how to put them together and learn how to fly them without the need for GPS or stabilization. That way, you know, you have a leg up in case anything ever happens.
That's a great question. It's kind of the experiential, you know, hands-on, you build it, you think about it, you design, you know, and you kind of get a chance to build that. You know, when we're, other questions? We'll go for just a couple more minutes there, Jeremiah, maybe take a little 2-minute stretch break here for everybody. Before we take a break, when we're going through the sensors before,
Yeah.
Typical ones that I've seen, I've tinkered with a little bit, are kind of the traditional little RGB and the thermal. You mentioned the lidar, earlier too, about some of the growth opportunities in lidar for all sorts of different applications.
Yeah.
As kind of being the next hurdle or next evolution of
Yeah.
I call it a sensor to put on these things. Do you see any other valuable sensors or other add-ons to a drone typically that might be advantageous, or that's out there, or that
Yeah. So right now, one of the big ones is gas imaging. So methane sensors, stuff like that. Multispectral systems. So, I mean, you have the typical, 5-band multispectral cameras. They have 10-band multispectral cameras now with the Red Edge duals. They have Microsense has the Ultim, which is 5 bands plus thermal. So all of that stuff is on the agricultural side of things. And then, you have Pergam and stuff like that with your gas imagers. What else is there? Thermal right now is pretty big. I guess when it comes to thermal, the hindrance with thermal right now is that there's only so much resolution you can get out of them to keep them reliable and accurate. And there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to thermal imagers that not a lot of people understand about them, but I definitely see them getting better. Better, faster RGB cameras is one thing, but the biggest ones I see is, the multispectral getting better, and gas imagers getting better too. Thermal imagers are definitely there, but to me personally, I think a lot of people need to take a thermography class before they do any kind of thermal work, because a lot of people are assuming a lot of things that they shouldn't. I mean, when it comes to thermal, I've done inspections because I have a level 1 thermography certification. I think by now it should technically be a level 2 with all the experience I have.
Sure.
Thermal certifications go by how much time you've put into it. Like there are certain classifications, I think it's like 30 some odd hours to get level 1. And then it's over like 300 some odd hours to get up to a level 2 or level 3. And level 3 is the real certification. Like you actually have to test for that one, where 1 and 2 is a lot easier to get. But the one biggest misconception when it comes to thermal imagers is that people think the temperatures that you see are actual absolute temperatures, and they're never absolute temperature. They're relative temperatures. And the only way to get an absolute temperature out of things is to do testing and destructive testing on things. So when you're flying in the air and you see a car that's lit up that's hot, and you press on it and you get that the hood of this car is 90 degrees, it's not really 90 degrees. It's probably close to it, but it's not really 90 degrees. And then all the other things where little things where how reflective is it, depending on how reflective is it, gives you a better temperature or a better idea of what the temperature is there. The color of an object matters too. The angle that you're looking at it through your thermal sensor, stuff like that. I mean, I wouldn't say the sensors themselves are what necessarily needs to get better. I feel that when it comes to these sensors, they pretty much do what they need to do, is people being more educated on how to use them properly.
Let's say interpretation or the relative understanding of what that's happening. When you mentioned kind of you mentioned 3 of the thermography type of levels, those are like, for instance, 1 and 2. Are those hours per
it's hours. So hours you put into doing that work. So when I got my thermography 1, it's just you learn the basics of thermography. And I think I spent 5 days in Beaumont, Texas at Infrared Cameras Institute with Gary Strand, a really interesting guy. He was like an underwater deep sea welder. He's insane.
Pretty interesting.
A really cool guy, but he made some pretty cool sensors and he teaches the class. And, you do that first, 30, 40 hours. and then you have to go through and log, 40 hours of actual work to get that level 1. And then you log your hours until you reach another point to get your level 2. And then after you get your level 2, you log even more hours and then take a test to get your level 3. That is what I last remember you had to do to get your level 3. So it's more experience based instead of just you take a test, you get this level.
Right, and that makes good sense. And one of the things later here that we'll be talking about, in addition to all this other great stuff, is we're sharing, in our discussion here, I guess trying to kind of operationalize opportunities for people in the class. Is something like those thermography levels something that if people truly aspire to get into this drone industry? Is that something that's definitely worth it? Is that a highly sought after skill? I suppose it depends if you're working in, kind of using that thermal stuff or not.
If you're looking into doing inspection work, if that is one of the main things you're looking to do, yes, get your thermography certification. If you want to do roofing inspections, stuff like that, yes, get your thermography certification. Because there are a lot more people who are doing thermal inspections and stuff like that who don't have the credentials to do it. And if you want business, your credentials mean everything to set you apart from everyone else. So yeah, if it is something you are looking into doing as, a part of, like if you're with a business and you're trying to sell it a service, yes. If you're looking into, getting a job at a company flying drones, yeah, I would definitely get it. It's just another thing that sets you apart from everyone else. Because at this point, just having your Part 107 doesn't mean a whole lot, to be honest. And then the other part is I can tell you, one of the companies I work for, the one in Indiana, after I left, they still haven't found someone to replace me. And that was more than 5 years ago. And it was because I had an AutoCAD background, I had a design background, and then I had my drone background. You could always find people who are really good drone pilots, but they wouldn't have any idea of how to use AutoCAD or something like that. Or you have really good CAD people, but they have no idea how to fly a drone, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's one thing to be a drone pilot, but you have to have other credentials or experience in order for you to, I guess, it's kind of mean to say it, but to be worth it in terms of being able to do the work that needs to be done.
So if we had, like in a program where most of our folks in here are all part of that, are working with data, driving data, analyzing data, line work, attribution, photo interpretation, understanding cell-based values in our data. So complementing like a 107 with that background is pretty advantageous now, I guess.
Yes, it is amazingly advantageous if you have that background and you have that knowledge. Because right now there really isn't anyone that I know off the top of my head that I could even recommend for that job at my last place, kind of thing. So if you're able to, if you can be that one-stop kind of guy who can go out, get that data, put it into AutoCAD and do your line work, you'd be hired in an instant, kind of thing. So yeah, if that's something that you can do and it's definitely put it on a resume, definitely get into it, because it is something that is needed for sure.
Yeah, this is great. Jerry?
When you say AutoCAD, are you specifically talking about AutoCAD itself or just CAD programming in general?
CAD programming in general, I guess. Right. I say AutoCAD because mostly when you say AutoCAD, everyone understands what that kind of work is. Right. I never like to say MicroStation because everyone hates MicroStation, apparently, that I've run into.
At least it's not Vectorworks.
I know a lot of people know ArcGIS. A lot of people work in ArcGIS that I know of. So knowing stuff like that definitely helps. Like Civil 3D, stuff like that, stuff where you can actually, that engineering programs, engineering and design programs that companies actually use. Um, and it's definitely one of those things where you have to be able to understand how you get that data and how you put that data into those programs and how you pull that data out. If you can understand all those concepts, it makes it a lot easier to get a job doing that kind of stuff.
So in that vein, as far as the computer drafting programs and software proficiencies for job skill sets and whatnot, could you tell us a little bit about as far as like Pix4D and program packages like that?
So right now, when it comes to, I guess, those kind of programs, I mean, Pix4D is probably the biggest one, followed by Agisoft Metashape. I think it's called Metashape now. It used to be Photoscan, but now it's Metashape. And then the next one after that would probably be Trimble's Info UAS Master. That's another good program to know in terms of processing the data. But those are just to process the photogrammetric data. That still doesn't get you to the part of being able to get that into a drafting program to use the data. So then there are other data after that, such as like Global Mapper, which is a great program for use in visualization and cleaning up a point cloud, stuff like that. Trimble Business Center is also another piece of software that you use to classify and clean up point clouds. Another good one I always recommend is called Virtual Surveyor. Virtual Surveyor is a great one where you, after Pix4D, you drag and drop your point cloud in there, you drag and drop your orthophoto in there, and you can go through and do points on a grid, mark specific points, and export those out to get into a CAD program of some sort. The biggest issue when it comes to getting useful data, it's not that a point cloud isn't useful data, it's just a point cloud is a lot of data and it's way too much data. So you have to figure out a way to decimate that data out enough to where a standard engineer is going to be able to put that into his computer and use it. I've worked for a couple companies where they fly a couple hundred acres and then they process the data out into a point cloud and they just say, here you go, to the engineers, like, here's the point cloud, have fun with it. And they can't even open the file up on their computer, or they can open it, but they can't even rotate the model around to get to where they need to go. So being able to go from, the drone data set to getting it into something that the standard engineer or drafter or what have you be able to actually use in these programs is a key thing, because right now not too many people know how to do that properly and in a way where the data is accurate and actually useful. I know a lot of companies where they have drone people, and in order to make like contours and surface files and stuff like that, they take the surface file directly out of Pix4D. The issue with that is Pix4D doesn't classify points very well. It sometimes will leave out leave in trees when you classify a bare earth ground point cloud. They'll leave buildings in there, or it just won't be nice and clean. So when they export a surface out of that, it tins over the trees. So you have a ton of data. Like, most of the data is okay, but a lot of the areas aren't going to be accurate at all. And I guess for some people, if they didn't know better, like the last company I worked at, the engineers and the licensed surveyor, he didn't know what the data should look like or what he should get. So he was completely fine with, giving them a surface and just cutting out the area that looks terrible. Where for me, I worked through it and I got rid of all the trees. I spent a couple hours, taking out every single car to make sure the surface was a clean surface that you can put points on and that you can actually use, and that is as accurate as I can get it. So being able to use these softwares to get them something that they could actually use is very, very important.
Jeremiah, when you're talking about Pix4D, that one's a little bit pricier of a software platform that we don't have or anything. There might be some student trials or something like that we could possibly use. And some of the alternatives to Pix4D that you did reference, are those also for a fee, or some of those, if they have like trial downloads or a freebie platform?
Most of them are a fee. I know all of them have educational discounts. I know Pix4D, they have a discounted version where you get like 10 licenses for a lower fee than a full license kind of thing. They have perpetual licenses where like a professor license where they get 2 copies and they can use it forever kind of thing. Most of these companies have things at an educational discount and get you a little bit more than you would have to buy a single one kind of thing.
Yeah, or than just having nothing. Like with in another course we teach CAD, AutoCAD and whatnot, and BIM, a lot of BIM modeling too.
Yeah.
And so, for that, I think students have access to, I think it's a 3-year educate, freebie.
Yeah.
But I think it's like a 3-year license. So a lot of those organizations usually have something like that. But so in general, Pix4D, other than, some of the surface types of.
I think Autodesk has Recap. And if you have an EDU email address, you can get Recap for free. Like you can get all the AutoCAD stuff for free too under EDU. I know you can do that. Another one that I know is free and it's open source is called WebODM. WebODM works pretty well. It takes a little bit to figure out and get running. Last time I used it was a few years ago, so it might be better now. But that one definitely works. It's just, there are not too many softwares out there that does it. I still think the tech is still new enough to where not a lot of people are at this point in time, it's still pay to play kind of thing. And it hasn't come to the point where people understand it enough to just push something out there. But I know every single software we sell usually has an educational discount or something like that, or a way to get it a bit cheaper, as long as you're a student, I think.
Yeah, and afterwards, you and I could touch base as well, and see what else might be out there for options to push through to people. I know a handful of people in the program, have access to a drone or some capacity like that. So it might be a advantageous tool, to include, or perhaps next year to build in, to our efforts here as well. And so I appreciate you sharing a little bit about that. It's something that's important for many of our folks there. So and so I'd like to take just a quick stretch break to give Jeremiah a break there. And when we come back, there's in my mind, when we're talking about this session, there's really three main things that we wanted to go through here with everybody. And number one, it's, what are some things to be aware of? You purchase a drone or you have access to a drone. What types of things do you need to know from licensure, being able to register your drones, things like that? It's kind of number one. Number two, I wanted to take you through what's actually going on when you fly a drone. Like, in part one, you kind of built your plan and what goes on in flight, things that you need to be aware of. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then number three, which we've done a bit more here as of late, talk about how we process this out to make some sense of the data that we have generated so that we can make some use of that data as an analyst. So we'll talk more about that. Training opportunities, career goals, which is touched upon a bit here yet as well. So we'll take maybe 5-minute stretch break, come back at 8 o'clock. And when people do come back, you can flip your cameras on there. We'll know that you're there, but we'll pause the recording now and take a little break. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us here yet, and especially to that of our guest Jeremiah here in talking again about principles of drone technology. We've explored some of the history of where we've been, some of the different types of drones that are out there, some general legalities, considerations, and just a litany of really, really great things here, Jeremiah. So thank you very much for all that you have shared so far. And prior to break, in the course overall, I kind of think of everything in chunks of three. You know, how do we set up a drone, you know, to do like some pre-flight things, and we kind of want to talk about yet, you know, what are some in-flight scenarios that we need to be aware of, and then, you know, we did talk a bit about kind of that post-processing or that analytics side of things at the end, you know, what do we do with the data. So if we were just to go back and backfill anything that we maybe haven't talked about already, so if we take a look at what are some things that we need to do, so we purchase a drone, we end up determining whether or not we need to register that drone, you know, where to put some of the serial numbers, license information, things like that. We've talked about the 107 regulations a bit there, and I understand that there's more in depth to that, of course, there, but somebody should be doing that. And really the next step then would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have a designated purpose for our drone, you know, number one, we're making sure that we have the right drone, hopefully for our needs, and we have the right sensors on there, whether it's a thermal, a light, we kind of say lidar kind of, you know, or an RGB, or, you know, whatever other sensors. We talked about some of the methane sensors and whatnot, making sure we have the correct sensors. So really, aside from that, what would be the next step that someone would need to be mindful of when they're setting up, you know, trying to get their plan of action into place?
It would be finding out what your client wants. In the end, anything you make is what your client wants and needs. Figuring out that part is probably one of the biggest things after you have your drone, after you have the idea of what you want to do, is knowing what your customer or client needs out of it. And that's how you end up basing, you know, how much time you have to spend on it, how much work you have to put in it, and then, you know, how much planning that goes into it too. So once, you know, you figure out, you know, what they want, let's say you go to a customer comes to you and he says he wants this 50-acre plot of land mapped. You then have to ask him, what does he want? So I'll give you an LAS point cloud, but you already know, you know, if he doesn't already know how to work with point clouds, he's not going to know what to do with an LAS point cloud kind of thing. So it goes to the point where, you know, do you want contours, and how accurate of contours? Is 1 foot contours fine? He says 1 foot contours are fine, and that he wants an ortho photo kind of thing out of it. So now you know what, you know, your deliverables are going to be, is an LAS point cloud with contours and an orthographic photo. And this is where, you know, I'm assuming that he wants a geo-reference and as accurate as possible, which I would say would be 1 to 2 inch accuracies. So you have all that. So now you got to figure out if you can even do the work itself. So the next step in that process would be asking him to get you a KML of an area, of that area, the boundaried area that you want, that he wants flown. So that way you can go through and start planning out your mission, finding out if you need to request clearance from the FAA, seeing if you use a DJI drone, making sure that you have the proper geo unlocks for the area that you're going to fly. One thing that I always do is I stick the KML into Google Earth, and for the most part, you can check out the terrain of the area. You know, if there are heavily trafficked roads in the area, if there are houses in the area, stuff like that, where you have to be sure to take into account in order to fly in that area and fly in that area safely. So once I get that KML, I check everything out in there, make sure there's no obstructions, towers, like radio towers, anything that could interfere, power lines, stuff like that. You have to go through and check it all. That way you have an idea of what you're in for when you actually get onto the site.
Is it possible sometimes that, so you have from the client, kind of a prescription of, or an order, if you will, which determines the area and whatnot. And so at that point, we're really looking at we kind of look at the imagery, but also we could really go to the site and investigate that as well. So really from an operational standpoint, it's up to us to just explore what we're up against, so to speak, and determine in our zones that we're able to punch in a plan, if you will, like when we're going to fly, how high we're going to fly, the general area that we're kind of pre-planning to map, to make sure that when we build that and we go check the site to make sure it's clear, power lines, things like that, knowing what we can do, if we can do it.
Yeah.
When we have that area defined, Jeremiah, does that then get uploaded to a website? Can you talk about that? If there's like a website that people need to be aware of? I thought there was something with FAA that we need to run if we're running something for commercial to make sure that it's clear in the area that we intend to fly in.
Yes, kind of. So a lot of times, so most of the drones I fly, it makes it easier for you. So like in DJI drones, when you open up the application to start planning a mission, it shows you radiuses around areas where, if there are airports, if there are places that you can't fly, that's where geozones help and kind of stink on the same aspect. You can also go on something like AirMap. See if I can find the exact same.
Yeah, if you have anything on your screen that you can pull up to share or not. I think some people have referenced, I don't know the exact name, but I thought it was something like with FAA where if you had a drone, like, and you had or the appropriate protocol would be to go and, verify your flight plan, so to speak, before, going out on a flight. It would say, no, you're in restricted space. That might be part of that geo zone, or it might be, so this might be it here that you're.
Well, this is where you go to register your drone. So this is one of them. And then where is my?
So FAA drone zone.
I used to have it here. It's not in here anymore. FAA.
And as you're pulling it up there, for any of us in going through, the setup, that's kind of the idea, is that want to make sure that you have a plan, ultimately, I guess, is where we're going with this. Have a plan, knowing what you can achieve, not to achieve, and making sure that you're clear in all aspects of whatever licensures that you hold. And so hopefully, we could find some cool, I can't remember the name of the website here, and I'll have to look at that, but it was something where we could upload a flight plan, making sure that it was, clear, so to speak.
Yeah.
John, Jeremiah, are you talking about the Lance authorization?
Yeah, this is one of the ones where you can do Lance authorization through AirMap. You can also do it through another app called Kitty Hawk. I think they're partnered with Lance too.
Kitty Hawk was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah. You have the visualize it. This website right here. This is one that I also look at too. For areas in terms of requesting. So all the ones in green right here are instant authorizations. So pretty much all of them are instant authorizations in terms of this area. So
what do those zeros mean? They're
zero areas are zero grids. So you're not allowed to fly in this area because it's right over an airport right here.
So some are 50, some are 100, some are 300. What do all those numbers refer to then?
So these are, so the further you go out, the higher you can fly.
Okay.
If you're in a zero grid, this is where you actually have to contact the FAA through, where is it? You request the authorization through this site right here. Let's see if I can actually log in. So we have, this is for Frontiers, but this is where you get your authorization and waivers. You apply for a waiver to be able to fly in zero grid areas. So if you go in here and you go and request an instant authorization to fly through something like AirMap, it will immediately say no if you're within this area. If you go into an area, let's say that's 100 foot right here, and you request an instant authorization to fly, it will only allow you to fly if you don't pass 100 feet. So right here, it's 200 feet. If you apply to fly in it, you can't fly over 200 feet. So this is just giving you an idea of when you submit that, this is the highest that they'll allow you to fly within that area without special authorization to fly.
So regarding that authorization, the drone, at least commercially and, some recreational as well, make basically their function, they work everything off GPS, like setting a home point where you can set it up and the drone would come back to a home base, so to speak, in case it gets off track, you can bring it back, type of a thing, at least for the better ones. Now, what happens if you were flying in a just, let's say, the 200-foot grid that you see there on your screen? So if you're flying that thing and it went above 200, now your drone itself is navigating essentially off like GNSS, I would imagine. So if that goes above 200, and you would probably be able to see that on your display, like your elevation and whatnot. But in this case, would the FAA also see that or know that you are registered to fly in there? That if you crept up to 210, are you going to get an alert saying like, hey, you better be careful, you're above your 200? Or what's that enforcement window, I guess, or how does that work?
So you don't really get an enforcement window or anything with it. If you request the authorization, because I know I've requested authorization, let's say, to work in this 200-foot area. If I went over that 200-foot area, since, like, if we're working with DJI drones, since DJI's geozones and geolocks are completely different than the FAA's, they don't talk to each other, kind of thing. So if you request something through the FAA, so what you see on your screen now, this is from the FAA. This is at your discretion. You have to go fly at 200 feet and stay under 200 feet. If you flew over 200 feet, I mean, you're not going to get an alert or anything, but most airports and places like this, they have systems. That's why you have these things called remote ID now. Remote ID was one of those big things that's come about where, a lot of people are saying, they hate it. They don't want remote ID, but it's one of those things that it's completely a safety thing. So with remote ID is they can see your drone and they can see that you're flying, let's say 210 feet when you're not supposed to. Since the remote ID is tied to the drone has a serial number. That serial number is registered under your name. You will more than likely get a phone call from the FAA, like probably the day after, and they will ask you, why are you flying your drone, or why were you flying your drone here and at this height, kind of thing. I've seen people online and a lot of the forums and stuff that I've been onto where they're flying in the area, but they didn't know that it was a restricted area, and they flew over a certain height, and then all of a sudden the next day they call up the guy. FAA calls up the guy and asks him, you have these 2 flights with these 2 drones registered to you. They were flying here at this time, at this height. Why were you out there and what were you doing? So with the advent of remote ID, if you violate it, there's a high chance that you will get a call about it and you will have to explain yourself. And if you can't come up with an explanation for what you're doing, you will definitely be fined, or you will be made an example of in some manner. So there are repercussions for violating these airspace rules and regulations.
And that's an interesting one too. And later on here, before we conclude the presentation, I wanted to ask a bit about more in depth than what I want to get into right now here. But is that something, going through these procedures that you learn about in the 107 training?
Yeah, you learn about all this stuff in the Part 107 training. Well, if you take a Part 107 class, so Frontier Precision does Part 107 classes. We haven't done one in a while in Maple Grove since COVID, but I know we've done Part 107 classes out at our Sioux Falls office. in South Dakota. You can take a class. It's not something that's needed. You can study for it yourself. So if you go online, you can take practice tests, or you can go through and read the FAA materials. There's a ton of information online in terms of knowing what's on the test and what you should know in terms of flying safe, legally, and commercially too. To be honest, if you were even just flying recreationally, I would at least go through the material so you know the rules and regulations. Because a lot of times people who fly, recreationally have no idea of these things, and they can definitely get in trouble for it for sure. It's just being able to know these things definitely helps you remain safe.
Yeah, where's the best place? If you could pull up on your website there, where's a good place that you can go and just start reading about some of this, so that they can get a better understanding of, I guess I'm not sure of myself, or I never pulled it up here, or just a casual web search might be able to help.
Yeah, usually I just do, part 107. I mean, a lot of places offer classes that you can do. Where is it? The FAA has their own. So you can go through and, go through the knowledge testing center to go through and get an appointment to take the test. They have all the information like operations over vehicle or over people, part 107 waivers, facility maps and everything. I mean, a lot of times, like for me, when I studied for it, I went through and, I just searched for practice tests to learn what's on it. I went online. I bought a book. One of the books I got was from, what was that company? Prepware. So Prepware was a company I got a book from, and they have an app called Remote Pilot, which I used to study for it. There's a lot of different places. So
yeah, and that helps just to give people a
Yeah.
sense of where they can start exploring. And I wanted to ask you a little bit later on, or more about the details of the training that you have there with Frontier too. At least this is a good place where people can start to go to expand their knowledge bases. I like to
Yeah.
call things there. And when you referenced the Kitty Hawk website, is that again, kind of can you explain how that works with the FAA site that we were just on, or is it kind of one of the same?
It's kind of one and the same. I haven't used Kitty Hawk in a while, but Kitty Hawk is kind of one of those things where you can plan a mission in it, and it overlays your mission with these maps right here, and then it allows you to go through and request the authorization to fly within those areas or places where where it has Lance approval, and you don't have to submit for a waiver to fly in it.
Okay. When this was something that's kind of been on my mind here too, and we've had discussions about this in years past when we talk about different drone companies that are dealing with various restrictions, and so you mentioned some of the DJI legalities and whatnot, kind of having geo grids where you just can't go in and fly there. Are there other companies that also have those grids, or how, I guess
No.
looking at it from a standpoint, I've heard that a lot of government organizations are not necessarily purchasing DJI drones because of some of those legalities or geo grids, and they're looking to some alternatives. And I know you kind of talked a little bit about that.
So the thing with DJI and the geo grids is the whole geo zones and not allowing people to fly in certain areas. That is solely a thing that DJI did to avoid conflict and issues. They fully did it on their end because they wanted to do it to prevent people from doing and flying places they shouldn't. There's a lot of controversy in terms of DJI doing it, and a lot of people hate that they do it because when it comes down to it, a lot of people have issues getting those unlock codes or unlocking waivers from DJI, and they get out to the field and it doesn't work and they can't fly a mission. DJI is the only one out there that I know of that does this. And a lot of people want, like, one of the main reasons people want to move away from it is specifically because they have those geo unlocks, and it's just another thing that they don't want to have to deal with. So they go to other companies such as Altel, or they go to get something like Inspired Flight multi-rotor instead, because it doesn't have those hard locks that you have to go through another step in terms of getting authorization to fly. In terms of why the government isn't allowing DJI drones, or they're trying to say, you know, they don't want it, it's solely because of data safety and stuff like that. There's a lot of controversy in terms of DJI and selling drones, or taking the information of your flying and sending it over to China or something like that. And to be honest with you, my personal feeling on that is that it doesn't really ever happen. You can actually set DJI drones to work on local only mode where it doesn't talk to the internet or anything. So that technically isn't an issue. The other part about it is that if these drones were actually sending data out, if you monitor your bandwidth, so if you have it connected to your mobile device, if you're not downloading a map or anything, you shouldn't have in and out traffic. You should be able to monitor data coming in and data going out. If you have none of that, that means no data is being transmitted. So nothing's going to happen with that. But that is the main reason why. Whoa, I don't know what's going on.
That's all right. It happens to me all the time. Yeah. So, yeah, and it's just, you know, it's kind of one of the things that I've heard discussed in the drone industry about. Basically, it comes down to data privacy, and it's interesting to me to see, you know, how there's some proactivity going on, you know, to kind of geo-lock these areas, and you know how this kind of relates in with what the FAA has for different restrictions and flight plans and that whole thing. So there's a lot of entanglements, I guess, and that's what I'm trying to kind of unpackage here.
Yeah.
For someone when they're thinking about going in and say, okay, I have a drone, I know my purpose, I do site visits, now let me build my plan, let me put it in here to make sure I'm clear, type of thing.
Yeah. So when it comes to, you know, planning the mission and stuff like that, is you have, you know, the FAA map that you have to clear what you're going to fly with the FAA. And then you have DJI's own one, where if you look on this map, here, we'll go back to the same area right here. Let's see, North America. So you can see you have warning zones, so areas where it's going to give you a warning to fly, and then enhanced warning zones. So if you look in here, the red zone is you're not going to be able to fly in this area. It will not let you take off in red areas. Blue areas, you need to request authorization. Red areas, you need to request a special authorization through DJI in order to fly in the area. So these are just showing you, you know, areas where flight paths usually are generally going to go and take off and fly. Areas where you're not allowed to fly at all. I don't even know what that area is. So this is a prison right next to a golf course. You're not allowed to fly over prisons. So stuff like that. But this, in comparison, is, so the FAA only cares that you not fly over these areas. And if you fly over these areas, you get the proper authorization to fly in these areas. With DJI, it's slightly the same, except it's another hoop you have to jump through in order to fly the drone. Some people have no issue with it. Some people have a lot of issues with it. I personally, I really have no issue with it. It does take a little extra time, but in the end is if you're doing, you know, proper flight planning, you're doing your proper due diligence in terms of the flight and everything. It's another step that, yeah, it's another step, but it isn't a hard step to deal with. It isn't a hard step to do. Just do it. It's another form of safety, and it helps prevent you from making a mistake or flying somewhere you shouldn't be flying.
Yeah, and that's a great point. That really is a great point. It's just about slowing down, building a good, solid plan before, you know, anybody does anything.
Yeah.
Did they make
And
the
that's
call on the prisons, for example, since I was highlighted, you know, whether it's prisons or whatever it is that kind of a standard thing, or was that just the geo-lock for the DJI's?
it's a geolock for the DJI. I'm pretty sure when it comes to the FAA, I don't know. It doesn't pop up, but more or less is you shouldn't. If you fly over a prison, you're gonna get some phone calls, kind of thing. It's just, I think that's a DJI thing. I know you can't fly over stadiums. There are certain areas where you're not allowed to fly over from the FAA. Like these areas right here. I'm guessing, I don't know what these areas exactly are, but these are probably ports. So yeah, it really depends on the area and what you're flying over, because it does vary in between the two. And it's another step that you have to remember to go through and check on before you get onto the field, or you're gonna have to try and do a geo unlock in the field, and sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure. Yeah, this is really, really informative. I'm just going to pause and ask if anyone has any general questions or anything like that about what we're seeing here. This is all kind of part of that 3-step process. You plan, you fly, then you analyze. So
Yep.
questions about the planning here that anyone might have. Yeah, we're just trying to
I have a quick question. Sorry if you already covered this, but how do they know where you're flying? They obviously pick it up on the radar, or?
So they have, so there's a thing that came out that's called remote ID. So pretty much like on airplanes, they have something called ADS-B. So it's a transponder kind of thing. They talk to each other. It broadcasts, you know, that I'm here, this is my position, this is where I am, and stuff like that. So with remote ID, it's something similar to that. So pretty much all DJI drones at this point in time have remote ID already inside of it. When you, right now is, if I take off like the Mavic that I have, if I take it off right now near an airport, it will tell me if there's an airplane nearby and how far away is it. It's the same thing with places like airports, that they have the ability to see what's in the area, kind of like a radar thing too. And it broadcasts its position, it broadcasts the serial number and everything too, just so they know that what's in the area and what's flying. Not all drones have the remote ID in them yet, but that is a regulation that I'm pretty sure last I heard is going to happen, and every drone is going to have remote ID put in it. And there's a lot of controversy in this because, you know, with my little racing drones and stuff like that, there's no room to put it in there. So it's one of those rules where it's not necessarily a gray area, but there are a lot of people who are just probably going to ignore it, and there are people who are going to follow it. But it's kind of scary and weird to know that if I took off, or if I went out by the airport and I didn't say anything to anyone, and I took off on this Mavic drone that I have near the airport, they would be able to see that it's registered to me, and they would probably give me a call and yell at me and ask me why I flew, kind of thing. It's just all a matter of safety. And it is something where the FAA is trying to make it so every single drone has it.
Yeah, that's a great question. Other thoughts, questions? All right. So this is really helpful, Jeremiah, and I appreciate you taking the extra time here to do that. And I was here. If we move on to kind of the second vein of like, okay, what does somebody need to do now that they launch it? Maybe they have a little home base, that they punch in and kind of set that up as your home point, basically your GPS location of where you want to start and end from, so that drone always comes back, hopefully. So you launch this thing up there at your predetermined height, to clear trees, things like that. Make sure that you checked out in your site preparation plan, hopefully. So you launch this thing up, you launch your drone up there, and let's say you're just canvassing just some straight aerial imagery or something like that. I've heard kinds of stories like you mentioned earlier about wind being a big one. I was involved in a small test flight of one it was a Mavic 2.
Yeah.
And, I think, geez, there were gusts like 30 some miles an hour. And you could kind of see that drone trying to hold on to that flight plan pretty good. It did overall, I think, a pretty decent job in those wind gusts, everything too. But interestingly, we had some investigation of birds and, predatory birds, things like that, checking these drones out, on our flight and whatnot. So when we're in flight, now that we've launched a drone and we've kind of start to commence our mission, can you kind of talk us through a little bit about when we get this drone up in the air, what's going on? What do we need to be aware of in flight?
For the most part is, keep your eyes and ears open for, airplanes and helicopters and stuff like that. Out, in the area that I am, you're not going to see too many low flying planes. When I was out in South Dakota in the farmlands and fields and stuff like that, I wasn't really thinking that there would be low flying planes out in the middle of nowhere in the cornfields. But then I was told that I do have to be careful because there are crop dusters everywhere and they fly pretty darn low and you have to be aware of them. Right. So it's one of those things where you do have to be aware of where you're flying, and what's around you and what is, the local issues that you can run into. It's stuff that you have to know and prepare for. In terms of, things like birds and stuff like that, for the most part, they will do what they can to avoid you. You'll see buzzards all the time, flying in circles around it. You'll take off in the air, you'll see one, and then all of a sudden you'll see 6 or 7 just, flying around you and checking you out and trying to see what you are, but they usually don't do anything. I've never personally had a predatory bird come at one of my drones. I've had a seagull come at me once. I got a pretty good photo of him. I got to find that somewhere. But yeah, they just, they kind of dive bomb it and try and scare it. But in the end, they know, it's not going anywhere. And they tend to try and ignore it. But there are instances where, they will try and attack and you do want to kind of shake them. And with multi-rotors, I mean, you do what you can to, shake them out and, land, descend, stuff like that. Fixed wings are kind of interesting because there's really not too much you can do with fixed wings when they're flying because it's all automated. You don't really hold them with the controller. But there are a couple of drones like the SenseFly EB. There are 3 buttons that you can use, and one of them is a immediate ascend and another one is immediate descend. And the really cool one that they do is they have a barrel roll button. So if you're being chased by a bird, you can hit the button and you just see this thing screaming by and it does a huge barrel roll to hopefully fend off the birds and hopefully they won't, try and take it down. But yeah, when you're flying in the air, it's just, you just have to keep your ears and eyes open to make sure. I know a couple places that I've worked with and a couple people that I've worked for, they carry around aircraft radios that work on the aircraft frequencies to monitor air traffic. So it's more or less is just you have to go through and realize, there might be stuff in your area, you might have to bring it down. Other things that you have to look for, I guess it's probably better that, when they're on the ground is, radio towers, stuff like that. That's a big issue that could cause a lot of interference. Is to be aware of radio towers because most of these drones work on 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz. And those are, the same wavelengths as, a microwave, as your own internet and stuff like that.
Sure.
If you are flying around someone with a microwave by chance and they turn it on, you could lose signal, kind of thing. So it's just one of those things where you just kind of have to be a bit hyper aware of your surroundings and all things that could cause an issue. In general, though, there really aren't. If you did your homework, if you did your proper planning, you usually won't run into any of these issues. But if you do, more or less is you just bring it down and land whenever you can.
So when we, let's say if you just wanted to take a straight air photo of a park or something. And so when we program in that flight to begin with, the software, let's say in a DJI type of a setup, that software is basically going to plan, given the height that you provide for an input height, that will determine the number of passes and the distance between those passes automatically. Is that right?
Yes. So in the flight planning software, it's pretty neat and pretty smart. For the most part, when it comes to the actual flight planning, you literally draw a box around the area that you want to fly. Right when you draw the box around it, you'll see flight lines pop up. Those flight lines correspond to the altitude you're going to fly at and the front and side overlap of the photos. So to be able to do that, you have to know, the sensor size, the sensor width. You have to know the focal length of the lens you're using, so it can calculate how big those photos are going to be, and it knows how to place them correctly in terms of the side and front overlap. When it comes to the overlap, in general, I try and stay 70-70, so 70 front back, 70 side to side. When you start getting under 70%, it can start getting a little sketchy in terms of the software being able to process and finding the key point that ties in between all the photos together. So you kind of want to keep that above 70 if you can. You can start getting lower. I think the lowest I ever flew was about 60% side lap. And that's because the area I was flying was absolutely huge. And one of the ways to cut down on flight time is to decrease your overlap. And if you decrease your overlap, there are less flight lines that it needs to fly. So it can cut down how long your flights are going to be by a lot. But that ends up being something where you have to be comfortable with it and a type of terrain you're flying in, and what you can see in terms of what kind of data you're going to pull out of it. So when you plan that flight, it's more or less is you put down these main parameters, and then it generates that flight plan for you.
Those are the smart systems that you end up paying for with the support and things like that. Now, I have heard of people, myself personally, that have been hit up by a friend of mine, just more classic photography, like an eagle came in to try to take out his drone. And I've had other people say barn swallows that get very territorial, like under bridges and things like that. And so let's say, if you're up and you're running a flight plan, and in this, I think it was on the Mavic 2 or whatever, there was like an alarm button that a friend of mine used to scare off birds, that come in close. It was like an alarm on the console or whatever of the device on the drone. Well, let's say you have to rapidly descend or you have to abort mission. So the drone goes back to home base. Now, after whatever, the threat or plane or whatever departs, can you relaunch that drone, and will it resume from where you aborted the mission?
Yes, most of the time it works. So anytime you, in the middle of a mission, especially with DJIs, I know, is it will pause the mission and remember that point in which you last left off. And then if you want to resume it, you hit a button and it will go back to that same place and continue on where it left. This is actually really nice to where if you have a large area that you're flying and you can't do it on one battery set, you would actually have to come back and land, swap the batteries out, and go back out to fly. So there, in general, nowadays, all the drones are able to continue a mission where you left off.
Yeah, and that's cool to know, how that value of technology where it's constantly evolving, be able to do that is pretty neat. Anyone questions on in-flight? Anything that might come to mind that anybody joining us live here tonight might have?
Let's see, another screen.
If you think of any, holler out there, but let's see here.
I do want to say, Mr. Wong, thank you so much for being here tonight. A lot of questions I've been trying to figure out, you've helped me out a lot on that. I appreciate it.
I'm glad.
Yeah, this is great. Is this part here, Jeremiah, of kind of like in-flight things, or kind of like?
So this is Cubase 3D. This is what we use to fly our quantum system drones, so our VTOL drones. So this is what we use for the quantum systems Trinity and Tron. So for this one, let's pick a random area to fly. Here. Well, that's an airport. Don't want to fly there.
Right. We'll get a notice.
Here. So right here. So most programs that you use, flight planning apps, are going to look the same, even the ones on the apps and whatnot. This is a little bit different because it's for fixed wings, but in general, they're all basically the same when it comes down to it. You have an option to, pick which drone you're flying. So let's pick.
This is helpful. Thank you for showing this.
Yeah. The Tron F90, and then we're going to use the RX1R. So the RX1R is a 42 megapixel full frame sensor camera. Yeah, payload info, and I'll click apply. And then you can add elements. So right now, let's say I need to take off somewhere. So we're going to go, okay. So takeoff and landing. So right now, this is where I'm going to take off. Let me make this smaller.
And all of these systems
Right now,
are basically the same, so to speak, in terms of setting up. I mean, same basic thing,
Yeah.
different interface.
Yeah, same basic thing, different interface. This one's a little different in that there's a transition altitude and stuff like that. Transition altitude is because this is a fixed wing VTOL, so it's vertical takeoff and landing. So what ends up happening with like a Trinity or a Tron is it will rotate its propellers upward and take off vertically. And once it gets to a specific height, so this one says once it gets 20 meters up in the air, it will transition to forward flight. So with this one is you have it set, you can change the altitude in which it transitions, and then you can change the direction in which it starts to fly. So when it comes to a fixed wing, you want to always take off and land into the wind. With multi-rotors, it doesn't matter too much because you're kind of taking off straight up and you don't have to deal with wings. So this doesn't matter too much. So I'll just do something random. So for this I don't want to take off going over a road. So I'll probably rotate it to take off going over something else. And then you have to go through and draw an area that you want to fly. So let's say you go through, and this is like when I said you draw that box. So right now it's telling me that the flight time is going to be 6 minutes and 50 seconds. It'll take about 7% of my battery, and there should be about 160 photos taken. At the flight I'm flying right now, my ground sampling distance is 1.29 centimeters per pixel, flying at about, flying at 100 meters, which is about, 380 some odd feet, I think. This is where you set your overlap between the photos. So you have 70% overlap. These are little fixed wing things. So, how far out does it fly before it turns around and comes back? You can tell it to, flip the direction it's flying, invert the direction it's flying. And then the other thing is terrain following. So one thing when it comes to aerial photogrammetry is terrain following is starting to become one of those things that's being added into all the newer drones, because you want to maintain a set distance or a set elevation height when you fly and collect the imagery, because when you do that, you get a more accurate, a more consistent point cloud and orthographic photo. So you want to do that terrain following. So when you fly this, so you can tell that, you know, these are the flight lines. This is the way it's going to go. Let's see, waypoint distance, skip waypoints, no. So that's all good. You can set it to fly like a corridor. So in a corridor, if it's like a roadway, you click certain waypoints and then it will set a flight plan for that corridor in terms of how it's going to fly. So if I click a 3D view, you can see the flight plan, which looks kind of crazy because I think that, yeah, there's a big hill here. So you can tell with the terrain following, it pulls from a database. Let's see if I can change this map.
That is pretty neat to see, though, to be able to toggle between those functions and whatnot. It's all part of building that plan. It's so critical.
So we kick it back into 3D. So yeah, you can see the terrain. It goes up and down. So this is probably pulled from like an SRTM database. So you can see where, you know, it will change its elevation, flight height to maintain a set distance from the ground. So when it flies, it will follow this flight path. So when you actually go and fly it, you'll see a little tiny airplane icon, and the airplane icon will slowly follow this flight path. So you have full monitoring capabilities. So when I fly with the Trinity or a Tron, I have my laptop hooked up to a modem, and that modem is in constant communication with the aircraft, along with having a controller too. So I can tell it to come home via the controller and take manual control using the controller. Or if I lose signal with the controller, I still can fall back onto the telemetry unit to tell it to come home and land too. So after I fly something like this, so let's say I fly the flight plan, it lands and descends, I go through and I then take all the photos off. Let me find Pix4D.
This is kind of the fun part as we transition into really
You
that
end up
step
taking
3
it
is
into something like Pix4D, and you insert these photos into there, and each one of these little red dots corresponds to one of the photos that you took. So this mission, I think, was only 79 photos. But you go through and you can see all the photos it took. And then these little pluses right here are ground control points. So these are points that we painted chevrons into the ground, and then we marked them in each of the photos that were taken. And that is to make it so they are accurate image size. So this map is probably accurate down to probably about 1 to 2 inches. So this is one version of it with the point cloud. So you can go through and you can see how detailed it can be in terms of what you're seeing. So you get the pile of dirt, you see all the cars. I'm pretty sure this is me right here, and this is my truck.
So Mr. Wong, I
in
have a
terms
question
of
about
recreating
this.
what you see, it's definitely there. The accuracy, let me see if I pull up the quality report. All this stuff is stuff I don't completely understand because I don't know all the black magic that happens when it comes to photogrammetry. I just know how to use it to make maps. But one of the big things you always look for is the ground control points. So right here, it is the RMS relative accuracy. So the relative accuracy to itself is less than 0.0, also 0.10 of a foot. So you can tell relative accuracy to itself is definitely less than an inch. If you did other things, so there's ground control points. Ground control points are used to move the point cloud to where it needs to be. And then you have other points called checkpoints, which this map doesn't have. And the checkpoints are what gives you the absolute accuracy. So the difference in between the point cloud and where these targets are laid out in the point cloud compared to where it is in the real world. So if you look right here, let's see if I can pop this out. Well, let me do that very well.
Jeremiah, are you able to hear us on your end?
All right. So if you look in here, this blue circle is where we shot a GPS point. That's where it is on here. If you see this circle right here is the confidence level. The yellow plus is where we marked where it should have been. And then the green one is the computed position. It's not exactly on top of each other because there's only so much that the software can do to move everything to where it needs to go. So you're still going to always end up with some inaccuracy, but this accuracy right here is less than an inch, to be honest with you. So when it comes to this, you fly your area, you take all your photos, you end up getting this three-dimensional point cloud, and then you go from the three-dimensional point cloud to, we'll go to global mapper now, to this right here. And then, let's see. So this is another program that I generally use called Global Mapper. And this is where you can go through and it's going to allow me to share my screen completely. So now you can see, I can take cross sections of areas and you can see how tight that point cloud actually is. So software like this actually lets you go through and highlight certain areas to clean it up. And it also does point cloud classification. So in here, I can see, hopefully this won't take too long to do.
Jeremiah, are you able to hear us while that's rendering?
All right, so you can do things like point cloud classification where it will do its best to figure out what is a building, what's a car, what's a tree. So right now I classified the ground only points. So now it took everything and computed and pretty much separated the bare earth points from everything else. And then you would end up taking this and doing points on a grid, like a 15 by 15, a 10 by 10 point grid, to then place those points on there at that grid so you can export them out to put them into, like something like ArcGIS or AutoCAD, like Civil 3D, in order to generate that surface. That's one way to do it. There's other software. I know this one. I can make an elevation map.
So Jeremiah, audio test here. Are you able to hear us?
I don't know if this is going to work.
See, for anyone in the class, are you able to hear me? Okay, so we're having some audio here with Jeremiah, it appears like. Go ahead, for anybody, type your questions in if you can, and hopefully he'll maybe be able to see that. you have questions about anything. This is really good material here.
Hello?
Too. Hello,
I guess I
Jeremiah.
hit the mute button on accident. Sorry about that.
Okay, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you guys now.
Okay, we're all kind of like, oh, maybe there's something went wrong there. A couple of people had some really great questions here, and thank you. This is terrific. This is absolutely phenomenal. Jerry, you had a question.
Yes. So, Mr. Wong, with the level of accuracy that we're able to have with this, at what point do we go from being mappers to being surveyors?
That is a very tricky question. And that's a very controversial question. It's more or less is something that I can't entirely answer, because when it comes down to this right here is I can say it is accurate down to an inch, but since I don't have the credentials of a surveyor, I can't certify that it is accurate down to an inch. So it's one of those things where you have to work with a licensed surveyor that is authorized to survey in a certain state or an area, for him to check your work in order to say it's actually that accurate. I guess if that makes sense.
That's a terrific question, a terrific response, or something I was thinking of as well. Michael asks, what is the amount of data in a point cloud? And I think that might vary depending on your study area. And do we need to, what's the storage or offload mechanism? Is it, kind of cloud storage servers, or what is the best way to manage some of that, Jeremiah?
That is something that isn't completely worked out yet. Point clouds can be pretty huge. Orthophotos can be really huge. Even just the orthophoto itself that you see for a general area can be a couple gigs big. And I know software like, Civil 3D can't handle orthophotos larger than half a gig. Anything over half a gig, actually even half a gig is almost too big for Civil 3D. You have to start using compressed file formats like SID or ECW formats. In terms of data storage, that is, in the end, a problem for IT. I just had this conversation in a training that I had today where they didn't know how to store the data or how much data they need to store. And they asked me, what should we do about that? And in the end, all I could really tell them is it just depends how long you want to archive the data for. In general, in my opinion, more or less is after you generate your point cloud and you generate your orthophoto, I delete all the other data and I just keep the point cloud and I just keep the orthophoto. In terms of what you give to your customers and clients, that is kind of one of those things where that is a hard thing to do, because you can send them the point cloud, but again, they're probably not going to know what to do with the point cloud. So that's why you have to go through and generate surfaces and whatnot yourself. Let's see. And
to your point about that, I know you alluded to that a little bit earlier here in the session of saying, how much data, that we're collecting do we really truly need? And I think all of us at some point have experienced the desire to hoard data.
Yeah.
Well, I have it, I don't want to get rid of it. There's clearly really good cases in which case after you've generated services or after you've generated data, maybe it's not necessary, again, it depends, to keep all of that around if you have your derived products from your original input data sets.
Yeah. So the other part about the issue with data is one thing people don't think about is, yes, the end product. So let's say I process all this data and the end product is the point cloud, which is, let's just say it's a gig. The orthophoto, let's say it's 500 megs. So in the end, you have a gig and a half of data of your endpoint, but your working data is a lot more than that. So as an example, I have something like this right here. So this is something I flew. This is one of 16 sites I flew for a job I did out in Florida for a mosquito control district. So the object for them was to try and see under like all the foliage. They have a lot of mangroves out there in terms of if there are little islands, if the tide comes in and out, where it comes in and out, and where they can put their product needed to kill those mosquitoes. And the idea was to fly lidar to see if they can get underneath all this foliage. And if you look at this right now,
And Jeremiah, we're looking at the Trimble software here, where before.
yeah, this one's Trimble Business Center.
The one prior was what was that there? That was
The other one prior was Global Mapper.
Global Mapper, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So on this one, so this one right now is I classified the point cloud. And now that you classify the point cloud, you can see underneath the foliage, and you can see little things like these little potholes right here. Or you can see that there's like a little stream that comes in, or that, you know, there is a high point right here, but these areas that you see that are a little red, that's where the tide comes in. So if they put down material in these areas, it's just going to be washed out with the tide. So what they ended up doing with this data is they only applied it to the areas where they knew it wouldn't be washed out. So that is definitely a use for lidar in terms of using drones to fly lidar over, you know, certain smaller areas. But back to the question is these 16 sites, it probably in the end, the amount of data, endpoint data was about 1 terabyte of point cloud data when I got the classified and unclassified point cloud deliverable. As I was working, in order for me to get all of that, I consumed at least 4 or 5 terabytes of space in order to get this data as the end product. So you still have to consider the amount of space that you have on your own computer or your own server. That working data in terms of getting that deliverable out can be significantly more than what your deliverable is going to be. So that becomes an issue in terms of data storage and how you end up handling it. So I guess in the end, it becomes a problem with IT. It's a really bad way to answer the question, but more or less it's just you need somewhere to store it, and you got to figure that out because in the end, it's just there's really no way around it. In terms of sharing the data, still the easiest way, like this 1 terabyte of data, I ended up buying a solid state hard drive and sending him a solid state hard drive through the mail. So I bought a 1 terabyte solid state hard drive, put all the data onto it, and I sent it to him. And for me is I added that into the cost of the job. So he got all the data in the end. And if he were to download, you know, that 1.5 terabytes of data, that would have taken him a long time. And that doesn't even count me uploading it to a server or finding a server that would allow me to upload a 1.5 terabytes of data.
Yeah, that's great. What would you say was, and apologies if I missed that, what would be the, or what was the camera resolution on this particular shot here that you did on this lidar?
This one right here, this was actually flown with a, this wasn't a camera. This was flown with lidar. This is a
LiDAR?
Surveyor Ultra.
So its resolution was like very fine, like 1 to like 1 something.
So this is, well, this is still a 1-to-1 point cloud with a pixel density of I think about 115 points per square meter. So these are actually, these are individual laser dots. So this isn't a photo or anything. These are physical dots that were hit from the ground and reflected back to the lidar sensor.
That's incredible.
So what that is, yeah, that's how we're able to, you know, get the ground out of it. Because if I turn these back on,
And you said you classified the trees and the
Yep.
foliage out of there?
yep. So like you see all this stuff right here, the orange stuff, that is all, you know, the trees and the foliage. And then I can go and turn them off. And that's how you get the ground. So you can see the
Sure.
road and everything. But there's no other way the guy would have been able to get this data, because since these are mangroves, you can't walk out there. You can't really take a boat out there either. So the only way he could have gotten this data is using aerial lidar.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Jeremiah, Michael asked, are there any durability issues with this many laser dots or returns, or, you know, from a standpoint of
Yeah.
storage?
For the most part, yes. When it comes to the lidar sensors, in general, you ship them back to the manufacturer to do a calibration. Most of the time, they might be able, if it's not too off, they can compensate it through the software. But in general, they have you do a software maintenance check or a hardware maintenance check with the manufacturer to make sure it's within tolerances, because it does, after a while, it will go off calibration and does need to be calibrated.
Any other questions or anything like that that people might have? I mean, that's cool. That's a really cool application. Thank you for showing that. So in general, you know, Jeremiah did a wonderful job of showing you, you know, kind of that phase 3 of what can we do with that data now. And a lot of that's some pretty serious processing as we've seen, and hopefully in time, the storage and other utilities come to catch up with the ability to really effectively process that. But just as that'll catch up, the technology is going to become maybe that much finer. It will always be a chasing game, but this is pretty accurate here. And you know, I know I want to be respectful of your time here, Jeremiah. You've shared with us so much here, and way longer than I was thinking here, and appreciative of that. As we sort of, I guess, come to sort of the summative remarks here in the presentation overall, I did want to highlight potential training that you have with Frontier. What would that look like if someone wanted to take the 107 training with you?
So when it comes to the 107 training, I'm trying to get something together in the Maple Grove office. I haven't entirely figured out a certain specific date. It's something that I have to work out with. We have a specialized Part 107 instructor that comes in. So we work it out between him, and we generally have it between our Sioux Falls office and our Maple Grove office. Once I start getting that going, if you know I get enough people who want to come and do it, it's just something that I need to gauge interest into it, because we try not to, if we only have a couple people come out, we generally don't want to hold it because it's not really worth it for us to fly the guy in to do the training. To an extent, I could do some of the Part 107 training. It just depends. So it really depends on what you guys want to know and what you guys want to learn. If it's specifically the Part 107, I mean, in the end, is taking a class would help. But like I said, it depends on the kind of person you are. If you're really good with studying up and reading materials on your own, it's not that hard of a test to take, kind of thing. If you want that extra bit of knowledge, and detail and need more questions answered, finding and taking a class definitely helps a lot. I mean, even if you don't do it through somewhere like Frontier Precision, or you do it through someone else, I mean, in the end, it's the same material. It's just the amount of questions and the amount of detail you want to get into. That's the biggest difference when it comes to the class.
'Cause that's been something that I know a number of prior students, they were really interested in that. And I suspect maybe there would be in our group here as well, if those training events were available. What would that look like in terms of maybe cost, Jeremiah, and time? Like, is that, I think last time I spoke about that a year or so ago, it was like a Saturday and a Sunday or something like that, a weekend training, where we come up there. What would that all look like?
So usually a training, I'm not sure in terms of cost, but more or less is we usually do part 107. It's a day, so it's about an 8-hour class that we go through. And pretty much we go through all the material. I mean, you drive up for the day or drive down for the day or wherever you are. And we just go over the material that you would need in order to take the test. In terms of cost, I have to look into it more. Since I haven't actually held one at the Maple Grove office, I'm not too versed on the pricing, but I know it's not too much. I think it's less than $200, I'm pretty sure. But I can get you all the information needed if you would like it.
That'd be great. I think it would be helpful to at least share this out with folks in the course. And I know there are a few people from last year too, 5-6 people from last year that had some interest in that. And I know you had the contours up here. It looks like that. I think there are contours there. It looks like
Yep.
Right? It just generated.
Yeah. So this is what I was saying. Oh, geez. About how the contours, if you don't decimate it out, it looks ugly. So in the past, I've tried, if I ever gave contours that look like this to a licensed surveyor or the survey manager to actually use on something, they would say no to me immediately and tell me that I have to clean it up and make it look nicer. So this is where, this doesn't look too bad from afar, but once you start getting closer, it's not nice enough for most. So this is where you end up doing points on a grid and processing something out that makes it look a lot nicer without all these dips and everything too.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot that I think a person can do with the post-processing aspect. And like you said, it all comes back to what does your stakeholder or your client ultimately want, or what's your purpose?
Yeah.
We come in there. Yeah, this has been terrific. This has been absolutely terrific, Jeremiah, and I can't thank you enough here. I again do want to be respectful of your time there here this evening as well. And I know we covered a lot on the kind of the future that you shared, and that was one other piece there that we spoke of that I could think of, and talked about careers and the training behind all of this. I think ultimately at the end, I just wanted to open that up for any last questions here that anybody in class may have had, or if there's anything else, Jeremiah, that you can share with me, feel free to email that in, your contact information or whatnot, so I could put people in touch with you if they ever had questions about, products, services at Frontier, and how, that might work into the future for anybody as well.
Yeah, I am more than happy to answer any questions if you come up with them. I mean, more or less is, I'll get you my information, and if you want to send to anyone, you definitely can. You have a small question or something like that, I mean, shoot me an email. I'll definitely do what I can to answer. I have no issues helping someone out or answering a question, because I know, because I've been in this from the start, getting answers is kind of hard and not fun sometimes to do. And finding that help is really hard to get. So if any of you have any questions, I mean, feel free to, give me a call, give me an email, and, I'll do what I can to help you guys out.
That's much appreciated. Any general questions in closure here for Jeremiah that anyone might have? No from Jerry. Anyone else?
No.
Well, Jeremiah, I guess that's a good sign. It means we were very comprehensive and going through everything. But those are a lot of the nuts and bolts of the plan, the in-flight, and what are some opportunities for people in the analysis, in the various careers that are out there with all those subsets of drones that are out there in the overall, industry. So
Yeah.
On behalf of all of us at St. Mary's here and in our data intelligence geoanalytics program, we'd like to thank you again very, very much for spending the evening going through this little workshop with us on drones and all the related cool technologies. It literally blows my mind every time we get into all of this to see how much is really there.
No problem, guys. No problem. Anytime. I'm more than
Yeah.
happy to do it.
Yeah, this is terrific. So I'm just going to pause the recording here and then we can offer up some any summative thoughts. So thanks.
All right.
Thanks again.